The early 1980s introduced Americans into an era that did nothing but shatter prior expectations. From the groundbreaking achievements in technology to the liberations to the economy and the government, many argue that the 1980s was the decade that made us. Specifically, the events that themed the revolution from tradition were the new actions taken by the President Ronald Reagan to pull the economy out of a recession, and the transition from the iconic hippie to the young urban professional, and the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. President Ronald Reagan's goal to reduce government spending and introduce tax cuts in order to solve the country's recession crisis was iconic of the 1980s as it transformed the economy. When Reagan was elected as a president, he was plunged into a nation in times of a recession. A popular quote from his campaign read, "Recession is when your neighbor loses his job, depression is when you lose yours, and recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his." Many said he was elected into the Carter recession because of this. Reagan had to play the game of a hero and rescue America out of the biggest recession since the Great Depression in the 1930s. His initial agenda was to give the upper class a tax break, allowing them to invest more and spend more. The money would boost the economy, and it was called the trickle-down effect. Essentially, the money from the upper class would trickle down in the economy, therefore making jobs available from investment and spending in business, which would ultimately help the lower class and middle class. Reagan also decided to cut federal spending by a landslide. His ideas of the action taken with the economy was called Reaganomics. Reagan's ability to drag Americans out of the recession and change the economy was another way the 1980s broke a prior tradition. The economy Reagan was able to revive was also a groundbreaking factor in the materialism and the great social transition from a peace-loving hippie to a young urban professional, longing for a Macintosh or a new TV. The iconic hippie from the 1970s hung up their peace sign necklaces and bell-bottoms for some khakis and shades to become the 1980s young urban professional or yuppie. Most individuals of the time period had a very materialistic take on life. They enjoyed living comfortably with their corporate jobs and greed-motivated behavior. Most of this behavior came along with the new booming economy established by President Ronald Reagan. Because the rich were given tax breaks, it seemed as though many of the younger generation idealized the life of living comfortably and soon found themselves focusing on career mills and straying away from the humanities and social sciences. The me generation, as historians remembered the era's young adults. Their baby boomer parents still may have seen light in the carefree way of the hippie, but society in the early 1980s encouraged money, technology, and success. All in all, the transition from the hippie to the young urban professional marks another breakthrough of the American norms of the early 1980s. In 1983, the nation was shocked as they were informed 220 Marines, 241 U.S. service personnel, and 21 other service personnel had been killed due to a truck bomb. A Marine compound in Beirut, Lebanon, a terrorist working for Hezbollah militants acting under Iranian direction, drove a truck that was filled with TNT explosives into the barracks building, causing the massacre. What was once a peaceful nation was now a nation in utter panic as a result of the terrorist attack, completed by terrorists involved with Iran as a result of the U.S.'s efforts for oil and enforcement of democracy. The baby boomers hadn't seen that many numbers of U.S. Marine casualties since the battle in Iwo Jima and World War II. With the children of the 1980s progressing, the United States had gotten a bitter taste of terror and terrorism. After the attack on the Marine barracks, Ronald Reagan had made the decision to withdraw the troops from Lebanon, as the Iranian and Syrian influences were seen as not even remotely working towards or with the U.S.'s goals. Therefore, many agree that there was no place for America in Lebanon. However, critics felt that Reagan did not effectively stand up to the terrorist attacks by not fighting fire with fire. Essentially, the war on terrorism was just sprouting here in the early 1980s and gave America the first real bitter taste of terrorism, thus transforming America forever. All in all, the 1980s serves as a gateway to what our country is today. The many technological advancements, social advancements, and change of political doings, as well as shocks to terrorism, woke our country up and modernized it from the traditionality of the nation we read in textbooks. Essentially, the 1980s broke tradition after tradition, and as some say, the decade was truly the decade that made us.